guys, and welcome to my wrap up for all of the books that I got to read in the month of February. I had a really good reading month. I read a lot of books. I finally have some 5-star books to talk to you guys about. So let's dive into everything that I read in the month of February. So there's 2 books I'm going to quickly mention first that I started and I haven't finished yet, that I am going to be taking with me and rolling over into the month of March. The first one is The Love Songs of W.E.B. Du Bois by Honoré Fanon Jeffers. I'm loving this book so far. I'm about halfway into it. This is a multi-generational family saga, and I'm really loving it. It has a lot of deep topics, hard topics. I would definitely look up trigger warnings or content warnings if that's something that you are possibly concerned about, but I am really enjoying this book. But I'm taking my time with it because I don't want to rush it. It's really good so far, and I'm kind of just like slowly making my way through this one. And I have a nonfiction book currently going that I'm about a quarter of the way into right now, and that is Jane Austen at Home by Lucy Worsley, which is a biography all on the author Jane Austen, who, while I've read a lot of her books, I don't really know too much about her life herself, so I am enjoying this one so far. I'm mainly listening to this one on an audiobook that I have checked out currently from my library. So altogether, I've completed 12 books in the month of February. I'm not going to be talking about them in any particular order. I'm kind of just have them stacked here. We'll go through the ones that I have physical copies of, and then the ones that I have I just checked out pretty much through my library. The most recent one I finished, which was just on the last day of February, was Black Girls Must Be Magic by Jane Allen. I actually put this on my TBR for the month of March, not thinking that I was going to get it from my library in time to read it in February, but I got it and I completed this book within like one day. It is a very short audiobook. I think it's like 7 hours, and I was able to listen to it on 2 times speed. And I happened to have the last day of the month off too, so I spent that just kind of finishing up a lot of stuff that I was in the middle of. So this is the second book is the sequel to Black Girls Must Die Exhausted by Jane Allen. This is a contemporary novel. We're still following the same main character. Her name was Tabitha from the first book. I think I gave the first one 4 stars. I gave this one as well. This is a contemporary book. It just has a lot of topics and things that talks about like fertility and just like midlife issues and romance issues, friends issues, family issues. It touches on a lot of topics in this book, and I'm not going to give any spoilers for this second book, but I definitely was not disappointed. I liked it. Some parts were a little bit predictable. Some parts I didn't know for exactly the most realistic, or things like went a little bit too smoothly or worked out a little bit too smoothly. But I mean, I feel like this was a very easy to listen to audiobook, and I enjoyed my time with it. I'm not sure if this is going to be a trilogy. I thought I had heard this is a trilogy. Yeah, because on the back it said something about trilogy. I don't know. They haven't released like the title for the 3rd book or the release date yet for the 3rd one, but you can bet I'm definitely going to be completing that one whenever it comes out. Next, we have McSweeney's Edition number 63. So this is a quarterly, if I can say that word right, literary journal. And I had never heard of it before. I randomly picked this up during the Barnes & Noble half-price hardback sale. Mainly this was a cover buy because this is just extremely gorgeous. And what it is in this literary journal are a lot of short stories mainly, but there are some excerpts from other stories. The last 4 stories specifically were all from the same author, Stephen Dixon, who had passed away, and they were just a sampling of some of his posthumous stories. If you guys happen to read this, my favorite one was Ebbing's Cursed Toccata by Rita Chang Epig. Oh, that one was a 5 out of 5 short story collection for me. Short story I should say. I really loved it, and I want to check out more books from that author, but I don't think she's written any books. I think just short stories that have been published. There were some, like with any short story collection, that there's gonna be some that you really like, some that you don't. I just think this is a nice concept to introduce yourself to different authors and experience like kind of different, more experimental story forms, because there's not just stories in here. There were 2 I guess you could say short graphic stories, as in they were like comic book style or graphic novel style. I will say though, I didn't really enjoy them, and if I were to rate them, I would probably give them like 1 or 2 stars because I just didn't really get it. Maybe it was a little bit too experimental for me, and I didn't really understand what they were. But yeah, there was lots of stories. There was a few that I really liked and some that I didn't care so much for, so I think I ended up giving this a rating on Goodreads of about 3 stars, somewhere in the middle, just because there were a lot that were either hits or they were misses, so I just went with the kind of middle of the road rating overall for this collection. But I do want to check out other editions of McSweeney's. I know they come out with them quarterly, so maybe I will consider picking up a subscription soon. We'll see. Then I was able to complete a trilogy last month, and that actually two, so we're going to talk about the first one though, and that was Imago by Octavia E. Butler. This series goes by the name either Lilith's Brood or the Xenogenesis trilogy. I especially love the covers on these editions that are from Grand Central Publishing. I gave this story 4 stars. I think it was a nice conclusion to this whole world that Octavia has made for us to read. The premise of the series is basically there was this big nuclear war, and the Oankali, who are like this alien race, had stepped in to keep humans from going extinct, and that's kind of like what they do. And we're following Lilith, who is one of the humans that they had put into like I don't even know what you call it, like they had put them in like into this like long sleep or whatever, and then they bring them back and then trying to have them repopulate and all and stuff. I'm not going to give away too much of what's going on with the series. While we do follow a lot of the similar characters, the perspective of each book in the trilogy is from a different perspective, so it's really cool to get to kind of see other people's perspective that are going on through these big life changes and world changes. There are a lot of interesting and cool concepts that Octavia brings up in this book, and I would recommend this series to you if you are into science fiction books. I do say I prefer, I know a lot of times science fiction and fantasy kind of get lumped together, but for me, I kind of prefer more science fiction stuff that could possibly be real and is set more in like real time, as opposed to fantasy. Even though I do like fantasy sometimes too, I do find that my preference leans more towards science fiction, even though I have so much more to explore still in the genre. Next, we have a 5-star read, and for me that was There by Tommy Orange. I randomly picked this one up because last month, in the month of February, I was reading books that were on this shelf right here that have like orange and yellowy books, and I was looking for something that I had available from my local library on audiobook that I could listen to, because I didn't have an audiobook I was currently listening to. So I went and picked up this one. I had been wanting to read this forever. I've heard nothing but good things about this book, so I wanted to see for myself, and I definitely enjoyed it. I would definitely want to reread it again in the future, because I feel like sometimes with audiobooks you don't get the most that you possibly can if you find like you're anything like myself and your mind can wander a little bit to just thinking about other random things. So I know there were parts where I kind of like faded in and out, but even then I'm still rating this book 5 stars because I did enjoy it, and I feel like this has really opened me up to wanting to make sure I'm trying to read more books about Native American culture, especially as someone who has that part of their culture themselves, being Mexican. I feel like it's something that I'm not as familiar with and that I would like to educate myself more on. In this book, we're following 12 different characters, and they're all traveling to this big powwow that's going to be held in Oakland, which I think was also a really cool aspect because I do have friends in Oakland. I do spend time there sometimes, and it was cool seeing some of those locations being featured throughout the book. So if you are from the Bay Area, or if you're familiar with the Bay Area, specifically Oakland area, then I feel like that is just like another level to the book that can bring some more enjoyment to you. Eventually, all of the characters' story arcs kind of make sense in that they combine together. They're not separate, but even as I do, which I didn't realize was going to happen going into the book, I kind of just went into it not knowing too much and just experiencing the story for itself. Even if the stories weren't meant to eventually converge together, the stories, each of the characters on their own were fully fleshed out, awesome characters that felt so real, and I was definitely interested in what the whole story behind each character was. Next, we have a new release that I got to last month, and that was Notes on an Execution by Dania Kukafka, who also wrote Girl in Snow, but I haven't read that book. But now, after reading this one and also giving this one 5 stars, I think I possibly need to go read another book from her to see if I like her other works as well. This book was on my radar in my most anticipated releases for the first quarter of 2022, and I definitely enjoyed it. I originally had picked this one up from my library. I got the ebook and I was enjoying it so much. I knew I was loving it straight from the beginning that I wanted to right away get my hands on a physical copy. This book is a literary suspense novel, and we are following the story of a man who is a serial killer and he's on death row. What makes this story different is that instead of focusing more just solely on the serial killer himself, we are looking at the different women in his lives, and not just like the victims and just other women who he had affected during his lifetime. We're following the perspective of the detective on his case. We're following other women he knew, or young women when he was growing up, and his mother I think we had in here too. We are about 12 hours from his execution, so we do see some of the perspective goes back and forth between him and the women. Danya does such a good job of making you question like your own beliefs and your own like ideas, I guess you could say, because as you're reading from his perspective, you almost sympathize with him a little bit, and that I don't know if this was just maybe just me. I haven't actually looked up any other reviews on this book yet, but in the beginning, before you kind of go into the backstories of him and the things that happened in the past, you kind of are almost rooting for him to be able to get out of the death sentence, because you see how he kind of like interacts with other people in the jail and the way he talks. Like, he doesn't seem like someone who's super harmful and dangerous, but as you go on through the book, then you kind of get to see the other layers and the other information that comes out, and it kind of just leaves you with like that kind of uncomfortable feeling. So I really enjoyed my time with this book, and I would definitely recommend it if that sounds like something interesting to you guys. Next, we have God, Emperor of Dune by Frank Herbert. This is the fourth book in the Dune series. I have two more left, and then I will be completely done with this series. I gave this one I think like maybe like 3.5 stars. I did enjoy this one. I think what I found is that these books are pretty complex, and listening to them on audiobooks just isn't really for me unless I'm like also following along with the book at the same time, the physical book. I pretty much read this one all physically, and I feel like I got so much more out of it. It's like not one of those books where you really want to let your mind wander as you're listening to the audiobook, because then you will definitely be confused and not understanding what's going on. Since this is the fourth book in the series, I can't really say too much what's going on in this one, but we are following Leto, who was Paul Atreides' son, and seeing what's going on with him and his storyline. This is a book series that I could not recommend to everybody. I feel like there are definitely a specific audience for this, and for me, I am mainly reading this because I'm pretty much curious like what's gonna go on like with the rest of the series, where it's going and stuff, and seeing what Frank Herbert is doing with this world that he's created. But I definitely wouldn't be continuing on with the series if I wasn't enjoying it at all and hating my time reading it. While I feel like they're challenging me as to like different concepts and stuff that he brings up in his writing, like not everything I totally understand. I'm sure there's a lot of this that's going completely over my head. I am enjoying the challenge itself of getting through this series. I'm definitely interested to see what the next one has in store. I believe the next one, book number 5, is called Chapter House. Then we have another new recently released book, and that is Black Cake by Charmaine Wilkerson. I was able to receive this one as part of my Book of the Month sponsorship that happened back in January, I want to say. So this book, it takes place currently in California, and we're following two siblings, Benny and Byron. They are kind of in an estranged relationship. We know that there's kind of been a falling out within their family, but we don't know what it is. What's kind of reuniting them at this point when the book is starting is that their mother has recently passed away, and so they're getting ready for the funeral, reading of the will, all that stuff, and she has left behind this tape that she wants them both to listen to, and also a recipe for this traditional black, I think it's called black cake, Caribbean. It's a traditional Caribbean black cake that is a family recipe to go along with the voice recording that she wants them to listen to. So through the book, we're going back and forth between both of their perspectives and the perspective of the recording. Even though the recording, it kind of doesn't read as if you're reading a recording. It kind of just reads as like a regular narrative of her telling her life story. Not everything that they believed about their mother is true, they come to find out. There's a lot of family secrets that they knew nothing about. Actually, looking back on my Goodreads, I realized I gave this book 3 stars, not 4 stars. I really did like the book, but I just never found myself like super itching to pick it back up. It was even though it was a quick read, like the chapters were perfect, exactly how I like them when they're like super short, so it helps you feel like you're flying through the book. But it did take me, even though I knew that, it still took me a little bit of a while to kind of get through it. I did enjoy my time reading this book, but I just don't know if it's going to be super memorable in the long run, which is why I gave it 3 stars. I feel like it's something that I kind of will forget about because it was a good book, but it just wasn't super strong enough for me to be super memorable. But all in all, for like a debut novel, I feel like it was very good, and I would definitely be open to reading other books that this author puts out in the future. Next, we have a book that I am very, very disappointed to say let me down a bit, and that was a graphic novel, the only one that I read last month, and that was Wake, The Hidden History of Women-Led Slave Revolts by Rebecca Hall, illustrated by Hugo Martinez. This book, unfortunately, I only ended up giving 2 stars to. It kind of was overall a bit of a letdown for me. In the graphic novel, well, first off, just for like the style itself, I'll talk about the artwork and then the book itself separately. It's not my favorite type of artwork. I mean, black and white is fine. I feel like you can do comics in that style and it works perfectly, but I just felt like the illustration style, a lot of it was very not messy, but like chaotic, and it's hard to kind of tell like what's going on itself. I don't know, it's just personally, and this is just personal taste, that it wasn't my preferred art style or one that kind of really spoke to me in any significant way. And then secondly, for the book itself, the whole topic is about this historian who she is trying to uncover, like the title says, the hidden history of women-led slave revolts. The only problem is there's not really much documentation and information to be able to look that kind of stuff up. So she is traveling, trying to figure stuff out, but really what it comes down to is there's a lot of blanks and unknowns that we're probably never going to know because there's no one that was recording these stories. So a lot of it is her kind of just making educated guesses on things based off of the information that she was able to find. So you have to realize that while they are educated guesses, it still kind of leads more towards fiction than anything because we don't know what actually happened back then. And something else that I didn't like about the story was I wanted the main focus to be on the women, and I feel like a lot of the author put a lot of the focus on herself and on her trying to make this story happen, trying to find the information, and I didn't realize that going in, that we were going to be focusing on her, on how she was how she's researching and how she's getting all this information, that it was actually like a big portion of the story itself too, and I've just found those parts pretty uninteresting, to be honest. I definitely appreciate what she was trying to do, but for me this just wasn't something that I really found enjoyable to read, and it took me way too long to read for a graphic novel because I kept putting it down because I would just found myself really losing interest as I was reading it, which is such a bummer because I was really hoping that I was gonna love this nonfiction graphic novel and really be able to recommend it to all of you guys, but for me, this one was just definitely a pass. Then the last physical book that I want to talk to you guys about before we go on to the rest is Ship of Destiny, the 3rd book and final book in the Live Ship Traders series by Robin Hobb. I gave this book 4 stars. I am loving reading all of the books that Robin Hobb has put out. I'm going to be starting the Tawny Man trilogy this month in March. And I gave this one, I think it was like 4 stars, and this is a fantasy series. It's the 6th one out of like, I keep losing track, 12 or 14 books in the overall realm of the Elderling series. I am really enjoying my time with it. This book took me a while to get through because it's so long. It's like almost 900 pages, so yeah, this book took a long time. I actually had the audiobook for my library too, to help me because I was not trying to spend the whole month reading this book. I really enjoyed it. I feel like I'm interested to see which of these characters are going to be showing back up again in the next series and then further along the line as well. Overall, I was pretty satisfied with most of the story arcs in this book and where they ended up at. My only issue, but I had already mentioned this, I believe, with the other 2 books, was specifically reading from the perspectives of the servants was just for me not that enjoyable, and I feel like potentially I'm not exactly, well, for now I'm not sure how I'm liking reading the perspective of dragons, which I think is going to become a bigger part in further series down the line, so I'm gonna have to see once I get there how I'm feeling about that. I don't know why. I guess I just never have read, at least I can remember, books where we're reading from the perspective of different fantasy type creatures, and I just don't know if maybe that's just not something I'm really into. But overall, I'm really glad that I finished that series. It was altogether a solid 4-star series, and I cannot wait for more books, and that I have so many more to read. So we have 3 more books to talk about, and they are all mystery thrillers that I was able to check out as audiobooks from my library on the Libby app. All 3 of these are new releases that came out in the month of February. The first one I read was The Overnight Guest by Heather Gudenkoff. I gave this one 4 stars, maybe even like 4.5. This was such a good mystery thriller. You guys, it's been so long since I've read a really good mystery thriller that I really just loved the vibes and the storyline and everything. It kept me interested, and I would just definitely recommend this to anybody who is into the whole mystery thriller genre. I kind of wish I had read this during a more like atmospheric time of year because this book takes place, a lot of it, during this snowstorm, and we definitely get that very cold, dangerous atmosphere vibe during those parts of the story. But that's like the present storyline. So we're following this woman who, she's a true crime writer, and she's going to this farmhouse, kind of isolated, to go and complete the story that she's writing when this deadly snowstorm happens. In this same cabin that she's staying in 2 decades before, there were 2 people who were murdered and 1 girl who has disappeared. And like I said, she's a true crime writer, so you figure something, she's trying to figure out like the secrets that have happened in the past with this house. When she goes out into the snow outside of her house, she ends up finding this small kid, and it seems very odd. Like, what is this kid doing out in the middle of a snowstorm and snow? Things seem like maybe she's not as alone as she thinks she is. Maybe something bigger is at play here. It's all together, I would say, very atmospheric, and I just loved finally reading a mystery thriller that really kept my attention all the way through. It seems like this book is being pretty well received by mystery thriller writers, so I feel pretty confident in recommending it to you guys that the chances are that you will enjoy it as well. The next one I wanted to tell you guys about is kind of on the flip side. This one was Good Rich People by Eliza Jane Brazier. This one I gave 2 stars to. I really seriously considered DNFing it, I want to say like a few minutes into the book, because I just couldn't stand the characters and they were just so annoying to read from. They just seemed very much like caricatures, over the top, very stereotypical characters that just didn't seem realistic at all. But if you can like look past that, then I think you would possibly enjoy this book, because I know there are some who have, but unfortunately that was not me. I mean, I did finish the book mainly because I was just curious to know what the ending was gonna be, but I feel like, yeah, for that factor, I mean, that's probably why I gave it 2 stars. Like, it was at least decent enough that I could finish it, but that's, I guess, not really saying much. We're following this super wealthy couple, and they have this guest house that they rent out on their property to different people, and I don't want to give too much away, but there is this like game that ends up turning a bit deadly for them. And so for that aspect, like, when I heard that there was a game and stuff involved, I thought maybe this could be pretty interesting, but overall the story was just kind of way too over the top for me and not really my style of mystery thrillers at all. Then lastly, we are going to end on a mystery thriller that was kind of in the middle of the road for me, and that was The Cage by Bonnie Kistler. I gave this one 3 stars. When I first started listening to the audiobook, I really enjoyed it. As far as the audiobook production itself, that's 5 out of 5 stars. They really did it well with that. But as far as the story itself, more of like a 3-star. It started out interesting, but then I don't know. So let me just tell you what it's about first. So we're following these 2 women. They both work for the same company. They're working late. They get on an elevator, get stuck in the elevator. When people come to rescue them, one of the women has been shot. The other one is saying, who's still alive, is saying that it was a suicide, but the police are looking at her and thinking that she's the one who killed the other woman. So what happened, that's what we kind of find out over the course of the story. But what kind of made it kind of go downhill for me was there was just like so much lawyer talk in this book, and as someone who's not really knowledgeable on a lot of like that, it just kind of went over my head and made me lose interest at times. There were some parts of the book that I really enjoyed, that I really loved, but then there was just some that felt kind of slow and that really lost my interest, which is why I went with an overall middle of the road 3-star rating. I do feel like this book definitely has an audience. There's some people who are going to really love it. For me, I just thought it was okay, not one of my favorite ones, but I do like the little twists and turns that happened, and the ending I feel like was a pretty satisfying enough ending. So those are all of the books that I managed to get to in the month of February. Let me know if you guys have read any of these or if there were any standouts that you read yourself in the month of February. I'd love to talk with you guys down below about it, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye!